What's really good, everybody? This is Nathan Allebach, and welcome to the podcast where we get into people's stories and go down a bunch of rabbit holes about what's really good in the world. For today's episode, I got to speak with David Hayward. David is an artist, author, and the person behind Naked Pastor, which is a thought-provoking blog about religion, specifically geared toward Christianity. He also runs an online group called The Lasting Supper, which is like a resource site and community for spiritually independent people to deconstruct their religious baggage, meet like-minded individuals, and process life together, apart from the homes or the churches that they've left. In our talk, we got into what it is to deconstruct religion and work through spiritual abuse. We touched a bit on our experiences in the church throughout the course of our lives and just how to be a whole person after going through so much loss and craziness along the way. I've been a fan of David's work for years, so it was a real privilege to get to speak with him, and I hope you all enjoy it. So now let's get into what's really good. We're live. David, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, David, I started following you a few years ago on social media, and I'm sure there's a lot of ways to describe what you do, but as sort of an umbrella way of putting it, you provide a space online for the quote-unquote spiritually homeless, and you do really cool art through like cartoons that you've done for a long time and some fine art sketches and all that. And this is sort of the platform that you've developed within the margins of Christianity. So I just right off the bat, do you want to get into it all, like what your story was like growing up in the church and sort of your background on all that?
Well, I'm not promoting my book, honestly, because I don't make a lot of money from my books. But if you do want to know my story more in detail, I wrote Questions Are the Answer. And it's the story of my journey, really, growing up in the church, all kinds of churches. I was baptized Anglican, but we went all over the place. I call myself, I'm my own ecumenical movement because I've been in so many churches, denominations, and so on. And ended up in the Baptist church and then the Pentecostal church. I went to Pentecostal Bible College, and I went to an evangelical seminary, and then I got ordained Presbyterian and all this kind of stuff. And then I ended up in the Vineyard Church, and that's where I actually ended my ministry in the Vineyard Church in 2010. I left the ministry, but I grew up in the church, and I was always curious intellectually. I read a lot. I studied a lot. I wanted to know the answer. I wanted to know the truth, so I kept pursuing it. And I just found that often the church isn't the best context to ask really tough questions. And I don't know. I managed always to find a church that would have me. And I kept finding a bigger box to fit in until finally I realized there is no box.
Yes.
And I quit the ministry, and we left the church as, official members then at the same time. And, we visit churches now and things like that, and we have, we associate with churchgoers and so on and so forth. There's no problem there, but I just found that I felt a lot more able to pursue my own spiritual growth outside of the walls of the church. And apparently I'm not the only one who feels that way.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned boxes and how sort of, like, I think that's a really cool way of putting it, how over time you're trying to sort of figure out, like, what church, what group will have you, or where are you able to expand on big ideas and challenge the status quo. And I think that's a really interesting way to put it, because every church, no matter what the structure is, I mean, I think about this more in the context of even progressive Christianity now, because it doesn't, you might move. I get the typical story nowadays, 2018 Western culture is more so moving from conservative churches to progressive minded churches. And all along the way, it doesn't really matter what the label is. You're going to find yourself in a box because whoever the pastor is, whether it's, the most conservative, big name, whether it's a Tim Keller or it's a Rob Bell, everybody sort of has their pat answers, and the places that they, like when you ask them hard questions, they have their sort of default that they go to. And if there's always an in group and an out group, and it's really, really hard to navigate, as someone who's constantly growing, if you're trying to grow in who you are and what you believe, and you want to be in a space where it's all open for discussion. It's really, really hard to find a space like that within a church.
Yes, it is very hard. Very hard. And that's something I always tried to create, or tried to build that kind of community where it could be very diverse, and there wasn't any dotted line you had to sign in order to belong. And that to me is the most exciting and probably the healthiest kind of community is one that allows for diversity, because we are diverse whether we like it or not. Everybody's different. Everybody believes differently. And so for me, the kind of community that reflects healthy humanity, in my opinion, is diverse.
Yeah.
So, and that's what we're trying to do in the Lasting Supper with my online community, where we allow for the diversity. There's no theological line you have to sign on or anything. And, the last church I pastored, we really did really well at achieving that to some extent, But then, it's like you say, there's a lot of people who just really want you to tell them what to believe, and how to behave, and I wasn't willing to do that, So it's it's very difficult to form that kind of community, though, for sure.
Yeah, do you want to get into a little bit more of like what the Lasting Supper is and what made you start that, and just what it entails altogether?
Yeah, so the Lasting Supper is my online community. It's a subscription site, so don't be shocked when you go there and I can't believe you're making me pay to be a part of a community. Anyway, so it's $15 a month, but that's because it's a full-time job, really.
Yeah, you have to be an admin. You have to monitor.
Yeah, you have to admin it and facilitate it and moderate it and so on. So I started it in 2012. I left the ministry in 2010. From there, I jumped into a university job teaching English as a second language to international students. And then in 2012, I started this community because I was longing to fellowship with people who were going through a similar process as I was, leaving the church, figuring out how to live life without the church or outside of the church's walls, and who may be going through deconstruction, the loss of belief or loss of faith or change of belief and faith, and provide a safe place for them. Now, I originally started it just as a resource site, providing resources and ideas and advice and stuff like that, and then realized a community was forming, and it's hovered around 200 people or so, and I don't know if I want it to grow much bigger than that.
It's like the bigger it gets, the more problems, the more difficult it is to manage.
Yeah. And so what we do is I provide resources, like I write a letter every week, and there's over 50 podcast interviews of the members and videos and stuff like that. But we also have a Facebook group, secret Facebook group that we run, and that's where the community interaction takes place.
Yeah.
And so we're very diverse. There's everybody there from atheist to church-going believer, and even people in ministry, ex-pastors, and you name it. It's just a wide diversity of people. But our core value is to listen and to respect the journey of others, and unless, of course, they're hurting people. But and so far, it's for the most part, it's worked. We've had a couple of blow-ups, but we're learning from that, and it's been a wonderful, 2012. So it's been 6 years it's been going. And it's just a wonderful, dynamic, diverse, fascinating group of people who, you just share your story and nobody judges you or tries to correct you or, start a theological discussion or argument about it.
Yeah.
We just listen and support. And, and it's wonderful. So I know it can be done. I actually know that kind of community can exist.
Yeah,
but it's very tenuous, though, because it's so fragile, because at any time anybody can, try to harm it. So it's a very fragile thing, but a very beautiful thing at the same time.
Yeah, that's what I was going to kind of get into. I mean, just from my own personal experience, I know it's really, it's a rough transition period to kind of go from whatever, no matter where you start from, wherever your starting point is, when you go through like the first phase of your life, constructing your ego identity into whatever you believe, and then you sort of fall into that deconstructing phase where you have to start to pick apart who you are. And for a lot of people that looks different ways. For some people they go through abuse, whether it's physical or spiritual or manipulative or whatever, or some people go through just a traumatic event. Some people they move away from a town that they were in their whole life and now they don't know who they are, and it looks different for everybody, but for everybody it's sort of this this phase of a loss of identity and not being sure who you are. So it's really, really cool that you were able to even get this thing off the ground in the first place, because it's like, to be able to create a platform like this, one, we already know online is the most difficult context to have any kind of relationship with. It's just communicating through typing words on the internet is so difficult because you have no idea. I mean, someone's intentions or who they are, like the context is watered down to almost nothing. So it's really, really hard to manage that and to sort of see through and be transparent with the people around you. So kudos to you for being able to even do that, which is just super cool. But yes, something you had said in there really resonated with me about how, the people, no matter where they are in their journey, when they come in to this group, there's an open environment, and it's not really a place, at its best, it's not really a place for just flat out critique and debate, because I think that's sort of what these things tend to devolve into naturally. And I think I think about my own story, like myself growing up, and how, when I was younger and had a little bit more of a conservative-minded theology and just worldview in general, the things that were helpful to me at that time in my life weren't people shouting me down and coming after me and trying to debate me. I mean, I guess to some degree, I could say that the debating helps because it sort of plants seeds for later on. So like in that moment of being debated, it's maybe traumatic or terrible or not feeling like it's helping at all. But then 10 years later, you think back on that time and you're like, oh, yeah, I kind of got something from that. But just generally speaking, the things that change your heart in the moment, they really are these open relationships and feeling like you're safe and comfortable with the person talking to you and that they respect you and that you're coming from it. From this place of just, wanting to learn more, like we want to understand the other more, which is just super important. Yeah.
So the thing, you have to switch your value from believing that somebody needs to be fixed to being okay with who they are as they are.
Yeah.
If you can switch your value, like you say, I'm a member of other groups as well, and I watch exactly what you say happen, where it just the gravitational pull is towards chaos.
Yeah.
And it's ugly. It gets ugly really quick. It's because people believe that the other person needs to be fixed or something, But I believe you can have community where, I'm not trying to fix you. I'm just here to listen.
Yeah.
Because I actually do believe this. I believe this. I mean this sincerely. That when people are given a safe space to just be who they are, and that they will become who they are meant to be. Like that's the healthiest environment for personal change, in my experience and in my observation, is when you're just provided space, and that's where real powerful energy, transformative energy happens. Not when you're being corrected and judged and whatever, edified.
Right.
When you're given the space, people can grow themselves, actually.
Yeah, like when you look across the board, just in general, I mean, there's so many hyper-polarizing examples of this happening in, the 2018 political spectrum right now. And in the news cycles, how you see a lot of, especially these days, it seems like you see a lot of young, troubled men. And whenever the limelight gets shined on any of these individuals for doing some horrific thing that happens in the news, it's never the case that they came from this loving, nurturing background where they were understood and they felt like they had an outlet and they felt like they had friends and opportunities. It's always, they were ostracized for something, and it creates this weird tension in the media and between ideologies, because it sort of becomes this like how do you approach someone who is doing harm or someone who is believing something harmful without playing this sort of victim game, because it's super easy, I think, to also almost over empathize when someone does something, when someone is committing a horrific act. It's sometimes, looked at from certain far right, particularly angles, where they may look at, a specific instance and just try their best to empathize with it. They come up with excuses for the behavior. And I think there's a sort of point of diminishing return there where you can't really, focus too much on that, but you still, at some degree, have to focus on the context of who the individual is. Why are they hurt? Like you see this, like you said in your own observations, I tend to agree in my own observations and in myself, where anytime, even just on a day-to-day stuff, when I'm living with my fiance, if we get in a fight and one of us is super pissed off and we're yelling and it's getting heated, once we get to the bottom of that, it's never just anger and hate. There's always some kind of broken piece underneath. It's really, really difficult to navigate that today politically. Like, have you been finding that in the online community, particularly, that you've been running?
Yeah, it's well, we don't go there because deconstruction. The lasting software is for people who are, going through spiritual deconstruction.
Oh, cool. So you have like a guardrail up to sort of keep it on track there. Good. That's good.
And that can happen to Republicans and Democrats. Yeah, right? Absolutely. So and so but we do have subgroups. So we do have a group that it's called Post-Election Blues, and we have another group that deals with gender and sexuality and so on, and another group that deals with, we even have a subgroup for board game fanatics, so
it's the whole spectrum.
Yeah, the whole spectrum. But yeah, you're right, and that's something with a small group online, my group's small. It's only a couple hundred people, but it's very, like, I facilitate that group very, very closely, right? So that's a full-time thing. But you have to be, like I said before, you're okay to be you as long as you can be authentic, but as long as you're accountable. So authenticity with accountability. And so you're allowed to be authentic, but if you're hurting people, we're going to let you know.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
And if you're mature and can handle that, then we can work on this and work it out and hopefully restore the balance. And but if you're hurting people in such a way, like we've actually had to remove members who were hurtful, or ended up bullying or whatever, and it's never easy. It's very, very difficult, because I love restoration, but that doesn't sound right. I love restoration, but that doesn't sound right at all.
I love you, but
I love restoration. A small group, though, it with a specific purpose. If there's somebody in there who's actually bullying in a context where people are trying to get healed from that actual issue that's being bullied, that just doesn't work. Yeah, you got to go do some private work on your own, and you can't handle this group right now. So that we've had to do that a couple of times. It's been very difficult, but that you have to do that for the health of the community.
Yeah, I think that type of just relationship monitoring is super necessary, and it really is. I've never been managing a group like that, and I can't imagine how difficult it would be to sort of make that judgment call. But totally, because I mean, for some people, I mean, I think about it in terms of, again, my own personal experience. There's been times, especially like my late teen years, early 20s, where the point I was at in deconstructing my beliefs, I was so volatile that like just in my rhetoric, like just sort of the way I'd come out of something, and now I hated the thing that I'd come out of. And I think in that sort of midst of whatever you want to call it, like I don't want to call it a beginning stage, because for some people, depending on the level of what they had dealt with, it could be years or decades that they are in that area. But for me, it was a few years, and being in the heat of that, you almost can't reach across the aisle in a lot of these relationships to form any kind of discussions once it gets past a certain point, because you get those natural tribal triggers, and you almost have to be, I don't even know what the solution is, but like you said, you have to kind of spend time away, and you have to really hone in on the close relationships that you have to sort of guide you through that process, because there's some people who they stay in that place by choice for decades, and they like the sort of spite they get from like getting a rise out of people, and they essentially become the thing that they hate. So do you have anything to like kind of get into about that? Because I think that's super interesting for me. That really resonates to a lot of the people in my life. I know how there's this tendency to kind of go from one extreme to the other extreme.
Right. Well, I have some people I know some people who have gone from militant evangelicals to militant atheists.
Same.
What I mean by that is that it's a personality thing where they're just so dogmatic, about what they believe or don't believe or whatever. And so on the Lasting Supper, for example, we have, like I say, everybody from atheist to believer, but something that doesn't work is anti-theist. So if you're anti-theist, you might have a really difficult time in the Lasting Supper, because there are some people there who are believers. And and to me, these are all just thoughts. These are all just ideas.
Thoughts. They're floating out in the space.
They're just, what I believe, we are united, and that we are one at a very fundamental, like a quantum physics level. And that these thoughts and things that we think divide us they're just thoughts. And so we're really all one, and these thoughts that we imagine are dividing us they're just ideas, they're just thoughts. So that's the assumption I work on, is that we're very deeply connected at a fundamental level, at an essential level, and that these ideas are they're almost like playthings, like toys that we end up fighting over, like children, and where that's not really what's keeping us together. It's like my wife and I wasn't attracted. When I first saw her in Bible college, I wasn't, wow, I love her beliefs. It wasn't. That's not the first thing I noticed. And, we did end up being on the same page belief-wise, but now we've grown in different directions individually. We have our own unique spiritual lives and beliefs. And we had to come to the conclusion, and that was a difficult transition to go through, but we had to come to the conclusion, what keeps us together is love. It's not compatibility of ideas. And that's what brought us together in the first place. Was we were attracted to each other, not because of theology, for other reasons. So, and I think that still holds true now. And so that's something that's a governing idea I have when I'm moderating the Lasting Supper. Is that these are just ideas and thoughts. Yeah. They seem to divide us, but they don't really. They don't really, because at a fundamental and essential level, we're united in one. So.
Yeah, like my mind, it's funny you mentioned all that, because my mind sort of gets to that place when I get in deep political, and I don't mean political as in policy issues, but more like political system conversations, right, where people get into the systems of capitalism versus Marxism, etc. And everybody sort of has their place on the map where they think, okay, this is the system that's going to fix everything. And I think, and my issue, I enjoy, delving into those discussions, and I have opinions on, like, times and places of what works and when and how. But to your point, at the end of the day, these ideas, over the course of the next, 100 years, 1,000 years, how many cycles of systems are we going to go through? Because it seems like every time, each system has a lasting life of 50 years, 100 years, 300 years. Like every kingdom falls, and then it rebuilds itself, and then it falls again. And it's just really strange, when you kind of step outside of it, you can, just like with beliefs, our beliefs in spirituality, you can kind of see all the parts floating in front of you and just observe them for what they are, and then move in the world as you see accordingly. But I think, also to that point, I'd like to hear a little bit of your thoughts too on just the sort of innate tribalism that does exist between all of us on the ground level, because, all that, I think the framework that you presented, where you're not judging, each thought and belief on its own merit, because these things, they change and they don't make up the whole person, but we still today, I feel now more so than any time in recent memory, these things that are thoughts and beliefs really have been dividing people so much more than any time, so it's really like, do you have any thoughts on just like how maybe we can like that frame, how we can use that framework that you presented in a pragmatic way in the world to sort of bridge some of the gaps of polarization that we're seeing? Yeah.
So I think it's really important. I've come to the conclusion it's really important to see this as a process, and not, there's no magic key or magic formula out there that if we follow it, then everything is going to be fine. I think what politicians and philosophers and spiritual leaders and so on have struggled with for centuries is, how can I be free without violating your freedom? That to me is the issue. I think everybody thinks everybody should be free, but how can I be free without violating your freedom? And so that's something that we're trying to discover how to do on the Lasting Supper. How can I be free without violating your freedom? And that, if we could continue working that out, it's the same with my wife and I. We've been married. We just had our 38th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And that's been our constant challenge, is we want to be a healthy marriage. We want to have a healthy relationship. And that's always, how can I be totally myself without restricting you being you totally yourself?
Yeah.
I want you to be totally you, but I want to be totally me as well. And so it's a constant dance trying to figure out how I can be me without violating her, and how she can be her without violating me.
Yeah.
And my authenticity. So that's what I think. If communities struggle with that question, then it's going to be on its way to health. I think that's a sign of a healthy community. Not that they have figured it out, but that they're willing to try.
Yeah, they're having conversations.
Single day. Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Man, that's a deep philosophical rabbit hole that we could jump down if you want, because it's like you put it, it's a tension that is ongoing, and it's not a destination that you reach. It's something that we have to continually wrestle with. And when I think about this, and there's a few contexts that come to mind. The one being how there's the notion, like there's obviously a lot of strong notions that evangelical Christianity in the West has held on to in the past century, like one being gay marriage and just LGBTQ plus in general, and sort of their take on that. If they were to, so I guess kind of to play devil's advocate, if they were to take the solution or the notion that you just presented in their context, the line that's being drawn is, how can I let you be you and me be me without there being harm involved to either party?
Yes,
and I think that's the most difficult part. That's the crux of it, because the harm to them comes from this eternal salvation aspect of it, which I think honestly, like when I look across the landscape of progressive Christianity especially, or just progressivism in general, I feel like that's a huge disconnect in how they understand the way like the modern evangelicism in America works. It's just how strongly they do believe in these things. The belief in hell is such a strong belief for them, and I think people have this really surface level notion where they, hell, like they believe that. But if you grew up believing that, it's not just life and death, it's life and eternal damnation or eternal life, eternal. So I think, do you want to kind of like dive down that rabbit? We don't have to, because we can go forever with this, but like I find that to be the most interesting place, is how do you kind of bridge that gap? Because if I'm having conversations with people that I grew up with who are in that mindset, I find it's really, really tough because they believe that that's harm. I would look at it from the angle of, obviously, if you're a baker and you're refusing to bake a cake for a gay couple, you are harming them. Like, there's a clear act of violation, in real time. But to them, it's reversed in this. Well, then, we're supporting their lifestyle, which is eventually going to lead them to hell, and we don't want to be seen perpetuating that. And that's such a deep just struggle there,
It's funny, just down the road from me, we have I live in Canada, by the way, and our liquor here is sold in actual government liquor stores. You can't buy liquor at the grocery, at the corner store.
I never knew that.
Yeah. So you have to actually go to a liquor store, a government liquor store. And we pay a lot more because the government taxes it so high and everything. Anyway, there are liquor stores up there. Then our grocery stores there in the same sort of parking lot. And now they're building a brand new building. And I asked somebody the other day, I said, what's going up there? I asked somebody in the grocery store, one of the clerks, and they said, oh, they're building a weed shop there, a government weed shop. Like, so it's legal in Canada, right? And the government's going to be selling it like they sell alcohol, and they get taxes from it and everything like that. So we were kind of laughing that, you get your weed there, and then you can get your snacks, and then you can get your booze all in one stop, right? And I was thinking, I drove by there today, and I was looking at all the workers there building this big new building. And I thought, I wonder if now this would only cross the mind of an evangelical or an ex-evangelical, but I was thinking, I wonder if anybody there is thinking, I can't, in good conscience, help build this building.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, and like, there's people out there saying, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
But seriously? It's just weed. Like, it's just, anyway. So, but I totally agree. Like, I think people underestimate the whole evangelical fundamentalist thing, where this isn't a joke. These people, you people.
I know we sound
no, I was there. We actually really did believe this stuff. Like, it's absolutely real. Hell is as real to them as the pavement they're walking on. And you can't underestimate that. They really do believe this stuff. And I really did believe this stuff. So I'm not judging them by saying, I can't believe these idiots actually believe this stuff, because I was there.
Yeah.
It's actually really a part of their belief system. Now, again, going back to what I said earlier, that's just thoughts, just thoughts. They think it separates us. They're going to go to heaven. I'm going to go to hell. But that's not real. That's just something inside their brain.
Yeah.
Synapsing, but it's not real. It doesn't necessarily reflect reality. But yeah, ideas are important, however, because there are ideas that end up hurting people, that result in harming others, right? So that's why I think the important question is, how can I be free without violating the freedom of others? How can we all be free without violating one another's freedom? And I think that's the political question. But there are people who actually believe, well, I'm not going to hurt you. God will after you die.
Yeah.
Right. I promise I'm not going to hurt you.
Yeah, it's the super
go to
spiteful
hell,
attitude.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, just stay. Yeah, I totally agree. Like, just staying in that place where you're constantly wrestling with the question. That's such a great way of putting it. How that is the sign of a healthy community, because you don't ever reach the other side. And I think that is the kind of way so many people who come out of that belief system, they fool themselves, because they think they reached the destination, and then they slowly but surely become more and more like the person that they hate so much from the other side of everything. So I don't know how much, we don't have to go too deep into this, but I'd be really interested just to hear just maybe some of the outline or some of the points that stick out to you. Like, what were the steps that you took in deconstructing your belief? Because you had gone in the beginning, you said you jumped around sort of denomination and belief structure a bit, going through like your early teens, young adulthood, and all that. So were there signs, were there like significant moments along the way that stood out to you, or sort of like just walk through that process a little bit if you want to?
Well, I remember it began early with the fear of death, and then, being promised heaven wasn't really all that soothing to me. And then, questioning Jonah and the whale, and then the flood, and, all that kind of stuff. But then it actually, mine was kind of a gradual thing. There were spikes in traumatic kind of experiences, but one of the biggest ones was when I was in seminary, and for some reason I was reading a book. It wasn't on the syllabus or anything, but I was reading a book by James Beach titled The Silence of Jesus, and he took a Nietzschean sort of critique of the Gospels, the sayings of Jesus and so on, and with really well written, and it just sort of took me through. He came down to, do you remember I don't know if you remember what was the name of that committee that they would blackball or redball if it was an actual historical saying of Jesus? What was that?
The Council of Nicaea?
No. I'm talking about modern day.
Like Enlightenment era?
Like Funk was on there and stuff. I'm talking our lifetime.
No, I have no idea.
The Jesus Committee or something like that. Anyway, and he said that basically he came down to there were 7 sentences that Jesus actually said that we can get out of the Gospels. And anyway, long story short, and here I was, at the time I was Pentecostal. The whole earth moved underneath my feet. Like, it was devastating, because now it was kind of like the Jenga block tower. Yeah. And the one at the very bottom was the inerrancy of Scripture. And that was being removed.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And all my other theology was hinged on this one thing. So that was the big one. That's when it really started. So I was like, this was in the mid 80s. And then, that once that goes, that's the thin end of the wedge. Once that goes, the inerrancy of Scripture, then everything started to crumble. And it took, like, here we are, 2018. It took a long time for this to finally, But no, I don't see this as a, backsliding or me having to regain my childhood or any of this stuff. I see this as a progress. This is my life. This is my story. Yeah. I like where I am now. I'm happy. Things are good. I feel I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm enjoying my life. I'm in love. I've got friends. I've got community. All this stuff. And I wouldn't be where I am today unless I was where I was yesterday. So I see all that I've gone through as chapters in my story leading up to now. And, I coach people through that process to get to the point where I think that's important, to get to the place where you look back and sort of see your life as a mixture of, compost is half earth and half shit, right? So yes. You mix it together and that makes a really healthy nutrient and from which to grow. So my life is half earth and half shit, but it's mixed together to provide the culture from which I've become myself, from which I've grown. So it's been a long process. And like I say, there's been spikes in trauma, but fortunately for me, it's been mostly theological. There's been some, unfortunate things happening in the church and, abuse and control and all that kind of thing. But for me, mostly it's been theologically motivated. For a lot of people, it's been motivated by, abuse of all kinds. And that's, cause them to question their beliefs and all that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds really strange to maybe word it this way. Maybe it's not the best way to word it literally, but it's almost as if you have to look back on your abuse fondly. Like, you almost have to come to a point in your life where you've gone through the ringer and now you're in a place where everything has sort of led up to where you are right now. And you wouldn't change anything. I think a lot of people, there's certain events, obviously, when you put yourself in the mind place of trauma or the mind space of trauma, you don't ever want to go back to that place, and you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. But then, on the same token, other side, it's made you, and it's brought you to where you are now. I think even just in my own personal experience, when I was, I started to deconstruct the framework to my beliefs when I was around 17 or so, and really, and really it came to a head when I was 20, and I had sort of been building a lot of resentment and not really tending to myself spiritually or mentally, physically. I was sort of partying and just kind of, three sheets to the wind, let's just, do life. There is no afterlife, etc. And it eventually led to a severe mental breakdown. And it was terrible. It's a long story. I was on a cruise and I was drunk and everything just sort of fell apart. And I had my first experience of a panic attack. So from this moment on, it was something that I had hoped after the fact that, that was like a once and done thing. That was traumatic. I'll get past this. But then it sort of lingered in my life for the next year, just really, 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 on a daily basis, waking up, going to sleep, nonstop panic disorder, and to the point where I had to get medicated. And it was all premised on just, me sort of leaving and trying to get to B, but not really taking care of myself along the way. So, in the midst of all that, I remember a lot of it very well, and I would never, ever want to go back there. It felt like a living hell. It felt like each day was a never-ending cycle. I'm going to wake up, and it felt like hell. It felt like waking up and we're just starting over and the same thing over and over again. And so, I wouldn't want to go back there, but then at the same time, going through that is what forced me to start taking what I believed and who I was more seriously. I started to value life more, and there was a lot of relationships in my family and my friends who I had disconnected from and treated terribly, and just neglected completely. And, going through this really forced me in a selfish way, because I was reevaluating my own, like existential life. I was thinking about dying and maybe this is the end and I don't know what's going to happen. And, that was like the sort of moment for me that really caused the avalanche for me to start hyper focusing on this stuff and making it the central part. And now I can't get enough of it. And I feel like I'm in a really similar place to you in this way, and a lot of other artists in the sphere. Like, do you know who David Bazan is?
Oh, yeah.
So, like, David's a great example of this because...
They draw the line.
Yeah, the best. I'm actually wearing a shirt
awesome.
now.
Cool.
Not on purpose, just wearing an undershirt. But he, like him going through, like, that super strong part of his life, thinking, he's going to be a pastor or a youth pastor, music director or whatever, and then losing it all, now he's in his... I don't know how old he is now. At least he's probably in his 40s, I think. Mm-hmm. But now he's in a phase where he's still writing music about it decades later. And, I think a lot of people from the outside may look at something like that and say, why are you still, hung up on this almost? It sort of seems like, oh, you're just kind of dragging out this time of your life that was hard. But when he's talked in interviews about it, I know he's like, he loves it. It's a love-hate dichotomy where it's constantly, like we've been saying, this tension that's just pulling at who he is, and it's defined him as a person then. Yeah, I love his stuff, and I love listening to him and his words and everything. Yeah, I really identify with it. But like, I want to make something clear though. We talked about, like, I love it too. I love sometimes I want to take a break, but often I love talking about it. I love helping other people work through this shit. Yes, I really love helping other people work, and that's why I do what I do. But I would never say, I can say to myself, listen, there's some things I went through, horrendous stuff I went through in the church, horrendous abuse that I wouldn't wish on anybody, and I wouldn't want to experience again. But yeah, I can see how it has contributed to the way I am. I'm way more aware, for example. I have compassion on people that's happened to. I understand why it happens, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. But I would never put those words in the mouth of another person. I would never say, hey, you need to just accept what happened to you as this is part of your story, man. This is so cool. And because I know people are like, I can't, I really feel I was robbed of my childhood, or I feel I'm half the person I could be. Yeah. I wonder where I would be if I wasn't so wounded and damaged and blah, 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 right? So until somebody can say it themselves, I'm never going to say it for them, because there are some unbelievable things that have happened to some people that, wouldn't be right for me to say, hey, you just need to figure out how to integrate it in your life. Oh, my God. Yeah, that's such a great point to reiterate, because that line for each individual is so different. I mean, it's all across the spectrum. Oh, totally. And some people, they do go their entire lives just working through the trauma because it was so devastating to them. Yeah. And it really, it's such a weird thing to even talk about. It's sort of reminiscent of a lot of pro athletes. How a lot of pro athletes, they have these really amazing, inspiring stories about how they, came up from nothing and they dug themselves out of the dirt and they became somebody. And it's super inspiring when you hear them telling those stories, and it's awesome that it happened to them. But then, again, at the same time, you have to also acknowledge the millions of people or the billions of people who didn't have that luck and maybe had the exact same thing happen to them. And it really, it trips me up, because then I kind of slip then into this whole mindset of what is even free will at that point, because how much and people, this is big thing in Calvinism, but it's like how much of your life is really under your control. Like how much, I didn't choose where I was born or who I was born in, the family I was born into, or the biology that I have today, or the experiences that happened to me. Like these are all the things that shape each of us more than anything. So it really is tough, because you want to be able to speak just like you are right now. You want to be able to speak to your own experiences and hope you can be, inspiring to some people, and you can actively be there for other people. But at the end of the day, we are all on this trajectory together, and we're all in a different place. It's super weird.
Yeah, it is. It is super weird.
Yeah. So do you? Sorry to cut you. Was there
No, it's good.
I was going to say. I mean, you've obviously been hinting at this the whole conversation, but is there a sort of framework that you want to dive into anymore of sort of what you believe now and where you're at now, just generally speaking, of all this?
Well, see, one of the things that happened to me was the words, even though I say they're only words, they're only thoughts, there's still a lot of power in those words and thoughts. So for me, when somebody says, do you believe in God? First of all, I say, well, what do you mean by believe? And then what do you mean by God? And each of those topics are huge, right? Mm-hmm. So, because I know when they're saying, do you believe, they mean, are you born again under the blood of Jesus Christ, your personal Lord and Savior, kind of thing. And then by God, they mean the white guy in the sky with the beard who, is throwing everybody in hell and who doesn't believe in him, and, his son Jesus and the Holy, all that stuff, all the baggage that comes with it.
Yeah.
And so, and again, these to me they're just words. I believe that we're all one, and that the universe is one, that there is this, I know this sounds really, a lot of people are like, that sounds really woo-woo.
Well, it sounds very Eastern, because it's like
I've been influenced by Eastern, but I think where I've come to is I see now where the East is using its mindset in an attempt to understand reality and articulates it in its own language. And the West is doing the same thing. But there's only one reality.
Yeah.
But we have all these different perspectives and mindsets that are trying to understand, apprehend, and articulate what this reality, this mystery is that we're living in. So to me, we are, the East and the West and North and South. We're all the same. And these thoughts are just what seem to divide us. Actually, are just that. They're just thoughts and words.
Yeah. I think that's like when I think about it in those terms. I think I'm actually pretty close to you. That's just keeping everything in an open space, basically.
Yeah, and if somebody held a gun to my head and said, deny that you're a Christian, I would I don't know what I would do in that moment. It'd probably be a very freaky moment, of course, but
yeah.
I wouldn't want to deny it. And if somebody pointed a gun to my head and say, you must believe, right? It's the same thing. I would resist that. I don't like being forced or controlled to believe or not to believe or whatever. But I tell people Christianity is my family of origin. It's in my DNA, my spiritual DNA. I like the way it describes things. The theology of the cross has very deep, significant meaning for me, and for philosophers as well. The Eastern philosopher Krishnamurti valued the idea of the cross and its symbolism, and the same with what's his name, Rosenstock Hussey, the philosopher. Valued the cross as a symbol and so on. So there's a lot of theology I value, because to me, the Bible, the Gospels, the Christian theology and everything is an incredible metaphor, a very deep and rich metaphor in attempting to articulate reality. Yeah. And I find it, I've been in it my whole life, I value it. I get a lot of meaning from it. So my home's in Christianity, but I have cottages everywhere, including the East and everywhere else. So and there's some atheists who claim I'm a believer, and there's believers who claim I'm an atheist, and I'm okay with that. a can has a label for those outside to understand what's inside. I don't need the label.
Yeah.
There's people outside of me that need the label to make them feel more comfortable. I don't need the label.
Yeah, so. That's a great way of putting it, because I hate, it's funny that I asked you that question, because I hate being asked that question, because it's such a way to box somebody in. And, as someone who tries to sort of stay outside of the ideological realm, you have to operate in whatever framework you're given, and the framework you and I were both given was Christianity. So even if we were to completely abandon it, we would never be able to completely shut out the influence and the mythology and the wounds and just the literal neurological grooves in our mind that it's created. And I think that's really, really cool that you're trying to maintain, in your own way, this belief structure, and that you're reclaiming it almost,
Yeah. So, let's take, for example, the virgin birth or the resurrection. People say, do you believe in the resurrection? I'm like, well, I don't, let's not talk about the historical thing, but the meaning of the resurrection metaphor, for me, has unlimited value.
Yeah.
And I value that and appreciate it, and so on. But if you want to start talking about the history and the historical Jesus and all that, then we're going to run into a snag. I know it.
Yeah, it always ends in a snag.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it's way easier to talk about all these terms and these experiences through the lens of, even this kind of sounds like it's pigeonholing the conversation, but mythology. Because people look through the word mythology differently. Some people, right. They see that as, oh, it's a fairy tale, it's fake. Other people see it as, no, it's metaphorically true. And I think you would probably agree. I tend to fall under that umbrella where, it's mythology is just the way. There's a reason that they teach kids in school, Aesop's fables and the Odyssey, and there's all these ancient stories that have been being told for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Because the importance that we find in these stories, it's reminiscent across the world. It's across belief systems, it's across time. It transcends the sort of boxes that you and I are constantly trying to avoid. And I think that's super important just to stay aware of and really work within.
I think it was in 84 or 5, John Bly wrote a book called Iron John, and where he sort of dissected an old myth of this character called Iron John. Mm-hmm. And it was a book intended for men to get in touch with their inner selves and their emotions and so on. In fact, it launched quite a strong movement for men getting in touch with their emotions and so on.
Oh, wow.
But and I read that book and got a lot of value from it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I think Iron John was an actual character. You know what I mean? A historical character. But I learned so much from it, and it changed my life, right? Mm-hmm. And so now I'm not applying that same thing to the whole gospel thing. But what I'm saying is there's so much truth. And when I say that, there's so much truth from that's transformative personally and socially. I think it's profound. But that doesn't necessarily mean every historical...
Yes, yeah. That's such an important point to focus on, whereas like you'd said before, it's so easy to sort of devolve into chaos when you start talking about historicity, because we have the best system of documentation today that there's ever been in history, and even now we look at events that happen in real time through completely different lenses all across the world. An event could happen, a shooting could happen, any kind of tragedy could happen, and people are watching the same video, reading the same articles, and coming out of it with completely different interpretations. So it really is. It's such a dicey, then you multiply that by, go back 2,000 years ago, and it's not territory that's easy to navigate.
No,
but
it's true.
David, I really appreciate all the time. This has been awesome. Is there anything that you're doing right now? Like, I know you've mentioned this book, but you want to share to people?
Well, I have 7 books out now, but you can find them all on Amazon. I'm not getting rich off my book, so I don't think I'm here to sell that or anything, or I'm trying to push the Lasting Supper or trying to push my coaching business or anything like that. But I just love what I do. I just love helping people transition and, to get over their religious baggage so that they get on with a happy life. I mean, how many people do you know? Well, outside of yourself, and how many people do I know outside myself who are struggling to get rid of this religious baggage that seems to be holding them back from enjoying themselves?
Yep.
And it's like I talked about this a couple of weeks ago on the Lasting Supper. When Lisa and I left the church, we decided there's 3 areas we really need to work on: friends, finances, and fun.
Yes.
And because once we left the church, we lost our whole network of friends. And we had to learn how to make friends. I mean, in our 50s, we had to learn from scratch how to make friends. Because when you walk into a church, you're given friends on a platter, right? They're big. Here's all your friends.
Yep.
And then the finances, because I had such an unhealthy, limiting beliefs, unhealthy beliefs about money and business and success and all that kind of stuff. And then fun, just having fun, outside of the walls of the church.
Yeah.
So, I just want to help people enjoy life. And, I know a lot of us are having a hard time getting rid of all that religious baggage that seemed to be preventing us from doing that. So, yeah, if you want to reach out, you know where to find me, nakedpastor.com.
I love that, man. And your Instagram feed is phenomenal. I look forward to your cartoons and your illustrations every day. It's always something thought-provoking and fun, and it really it wraps all this into a nice, I almost said neat. It's the opposite of neat. This nice, messy bundle of just like cool, overarching experiences within, what we've both been talking about here. So. Yeah,
Instagram's fun. It's one of my most active social media accounts. It's just so much fun. Yeah,
it's phenomenal.
It's cool. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much again for the time, and I'll see you on the internet.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Nathan. Anytime. Let's do it again soon.
Yeah, sure, man. Take care.
All right. Bye.